Have you ever been in a situation where someone clearly loves you, yet something inside you still feels unsettled? Not because he treats you badly, not because he ignores you, but because part of his emotional world still seems connected to another woman. And that creates a very strange kind of feeling, a quiet tension, the kind that doesn't explode into obvious conflict, but sits quietly in the background of your thoughts. You see the way he looks at you. You feel the warmth in his voice. You notice the care in the way he shows up for you. And in those moments, the love feels real, completely real. But then something small happens. Maybe he mentions her name in passing. Maybe a memory slips into conversation. Maybe you sense a lingering emotional thread that hasn't fully disappeared. And suddenly, the calm feeling inside you shifts. Questions begin appearing. If he truly loves you, why does another woman still seem present in his emotional world? Why does it feel like you're sharing space with someone from his past? Your mind tries to make sense of it. You replay conversations. You analyze small details. You wonder if you're imagining things or if your intuition is picking up something real. Because the most confusing part of all is this: you can feel his love. It's not cold, it's not distant. Yet something about the situation still feels unfinished. And when love and uncertainty exist at the same time, the heart enters a very difficult place. A place where you want to trust what you feel, but you also want clarity. You want to understand what's really happening beneath the surface. Because if love is truly there, then why does part of him still seem emotionally connected somewhere else? Is it something unresolved? Is it something temporary? Or is there something deeper going on that most people never talk about, but quietly experience in relationships all the time? The answer to that question is far more complex and far more human than most people realize. If you are in a situation like this right now, the first thing you need to understand is something very important. This is not happening because there is something wrong with you. It's not because you are not good enough. It's not because you failed to love him the right way. And it's not because you somehow lost a competition with someone from his past. When the heart senses emotional uncertainty, the mind often searches for a reason to blame itself. It asks painful questions like, what did I do wrong? Why can't he fully choose me? Why does another woman still seem to exist in his emotional world? But these questions usually come from a place of fear, not truth. Because relationships are rarely as simple as the stories we were taught growing up. Many people were raised to believe that love should be very clear and very immediate. If someone truly loves you, they should have no emotional connection to anyone else. If someone chooses you, their past should disappear instantly. If someone cares about you, there should be no confusion. But real human emotions don't always follow those rules. The heart doesn't erase memories the way we erase files from a computer. Emotional bonds are created through time, shared experiences, and deep psychological patterns. And sometimes those bonds remain present for longer than we expect, even when someone genuinely wants to move forward. That doesn't mean the past relationship still holds the same meaning. Often it simply means the mind has not completely reorganized itself yet. Joseph Murphy often spoke about the incredible influence of the subconscious mind. According to his teachings, the subconscious mind does not operate based on logic or quick decisions. It operates through patterns that were formed over time. When two people spend months or years connected emotionally, their subconscious mind becomes familiar with that emotional pattern. And familiarity is powerful. Even when the conscious mind decides to move forward, the subconscious mind may still carry echoes of that connection. Not because the person wants to hold on to it, but because the mind naturally takes time to release old emotional impressions. This is something that happens to many people, even if they never talk about it openly. Someone can genuinely care about a new partner while still processing emotional fragments from the past. It doesn't mean their feelings toward you are fake. It simply means human emotions are layered. But when you find yourself in the middle of that situation, it's easy to misinterpret what you're seeing. Your mind might assume the worst. You might believe that you're standing in the shadow of another woman. You might feel like you're waiting for him to make a final choice. And slowly, without realizing it, the situation begins affecting how you see yourself. Your confidence may start to shrink. You may start overanalyzing small details. A delayed message suddenly feels significant. A distracted tone feels like rejection. A casual mention of the past feels like proof of something deeper. But often these interpretations come from fear rather than reality. And fear has a powerful way of distorting perception. When the mind becomes focused on a potential threat, it begins searching for evidence everywhere. It becomes hyper-aware. Every small signal becomes magnified. This is not because you are overly emotional. It's because the human mind is wired to protect emotional attachment. When you care about someone, your brain naturally tries to detect anything that might threaten that connection. So if you've been feeling confused, anxious, or emotionally unsettled in a situation like this, please understand something clearly. Those reactions do not mean you are weak. They mean you are human. They mean you care. But there is another truth that is equally important. The way we interpret situations can sometimes create more emotional pain than the situation itself. Because when the mind begins assuming that love must be defended or competed for, it creates a constant feeling of tension. You may begin feeling like you must prove your value, like you must become better, more patient, more understanding than someone who existed in his past. And that silent pressure can slowly drain your emotional energy. But love was never meant to feel like a competition. It was never meant to feel like you're standing on a stage trying to earn approval. Real emotional connection grows in an entirely different environment. It grows where there is emotional safety, where there is calm, where two people can exist together without constantly measuring themselves against someone else. And this is why understanding the deeper dynamics behind situations like this is so important. Because once you understand what is really happening beneath the surface, the fear begins to lose its power. You stop seeing yourself as someone competing for a place in his life. Instead, you begin seeing the situation with clarity. And clarity changes everything. It changes how you think, it changes how you respond. And most importantly, it changes the emotional energy you bring into the relationship. But before that clarity becomes possible, there is one crucial shift that needs to happen. You need to understand what most people do wrong in situations like this without even realizing it. Because the reaction most people have when they feel emotionally threatened often creates the very outcome they are afraid of. When someone realizes that the person they love may still be emotionally connected to another woman, the mind immediately moves into protection mode. And protection mode usually leads to one instinct: control, not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it appears as questions, sometimes as emotional conversations, sometimes as subtle attempts to secure reassurance. You might find yourself asking things like, do you still talk to her? Are you still thinking about her? Is there anything between you two? And these questions don't come from manipulation. They come from a very human desire to feel safe. But here's where something important happens that most people never notice. When the mind believes love is under threat, it begins focusing almost entirely on the perceived rival. The other woman suddenly becomes the center of your thoughts. You start comparing. You wonder how she looked. You wonder what their connection was like. You wonder what she had that you might not. Even if you never say these thoughts out loud, they quietly start shaping your emotional state. And once that happens, your behavior begins changing in subtle ways. You may start becoming more cautious in conversations. You may start analyzing his reactions more closely. You may even find yourself trying harder to prove that you are the better partner. But here is the hidden problem with that approach. The moment love begins to feel like a competition, something very important begins disappearing. Peace. Because when the mind is constantly measuring itself against someone else, it can never fully relax. Every interaction becomes a test. Every small signal becomes something to interpret. Every moment of distance suddenly feels like confirmation of your fear. And slowly, without realizing it, the relationship atmosphere begins filling with tension. Not loud tension, quiet tension, the kind that lives beneath conversations, the kind that shows up in subtle ways, a slightly anxious tone, a small hesitation before asking a question, a lingering feeling that something needs to be resolved immediately. But human beings are incredibly sensitive to emotional pressure. Even when nothing is said directly, people can feel when they are being pulled toward a decision. And when someone feels emotional pressure, the mind often reacts by creating distance. Not because they want to hurt the other person, but because pressure activates resistance. Joseph Murphy spoke often about this psychological dynamic. He explained that the subconscious mind does not respond well to force. It responds to belief. When someone tries to push life in a certain direction through anxiety or urgency, the subconscious mind often creates the opposite effect. This happens because emotional pressure communicates something very different from confidence. Pressure says, "Something is wrong. Something must be fixed. I might lose this." And those signals create instability inside the relationship. Even if love exists, the emotional environment begins feeling tense. And when relationships feel tense, people often become confused about what they truly feel. But there is another mistake many people make in situations like this. They begin trying to erase the past. They hope that if the other woman disappears completely, everything will suddenly feel secure. So they ask for boundaries. They ask for reassurance. They ask for proof that the past relationship is truly over. Again, these desires are completely understandable. But focusing entirely on eliminating the past often keeps the past emotionally alive, because attention gives energy to whatever it focuses on. If the conversation keeps returning to the same person from his past, that person remains present in the emotional landscape of the relationship, even if everyone wishes it would simply disappear. And this is where many relationships become stuck. Not because love is missing, but because fear has taken control of the emotional narrative. The relationship begins revolving around what might be lost instead of what is actually being built. And when the mind stays in that state long enough, it can create the very outcome it fears most. Because relationships thrive in emotional environments that feel calm and natural, not environments filled with silent comparisons and constant evaluation. But there is a deeper principle behind all of this, a principle that explains why some relationships naturally move toward clarity, while others remain trapped in emotional uncertainty. And understanding that principle changes the way you see everything that is happening. Because once you see the hidden law operating beneath the surface, you realize something powerful. The situation is not about competing for someone's love. It's about understanding how emotional energy shapes the direction of a relationship. And that realization opens the door to a completely different approach. To truly understand situations like this, we need to step away from emotional reactions for a moment and look at something deeper. Because relationships are not shaped only by actions, conversations, or circumstances, they are also shaped by the invisible patterns of the mind. Joseph Murphy spoke extensively about this in his teachings on the subconscious mind. He explained that life responds not only to what we consciously decide, but to the emotional impressions that live beneath our awareness. These impressions quietly influence behavior, attraction, attention, and emotional attachment. And when it comes to relationships, this principle becomes especially powerful, because the subconscious mind forms bonds through repetition and emotional intensity. When two people spend a long period of time connected, sharing experiences, memories, struggles, and intimacy, their minds begin building a psychological pattern around that relationship. This pattern doesn't disappear instantly when the relationship ends. Even if someone consciously moves on, the subconscious mind may still carry traces of that old emotional structure, not because the person still wants that connection, but because the mind naturally holds onto familiar emotional experiences until something new replaces them. Murphy often described the subconscious mind as soil. Whatever emotional ideas are planted in it consistently will eventually grow. If the mind continues to revisit memories of a past relationship, those emotional roots remain active. But when a new emotional experience becomes stronger, calmer and more meaningful, the mind gradually shifts its focus. The old pattern slowly loses its influence. And this is the hidden law many people overlook. The subconscious mind does not release emotional attachments through force. It releases them through replacement, through new emotional impressions that feel more stable, more peaceful, and more fulfilling. This means something very important for anyone who finds themselves in a situation where their partner still seems connected to someone from the past. The solution is not emotional pressure, it is emotional alignment. Because pressure communicates fear, alignment communicates certainty, and the subconscious mind responds very differently to those two states. When someone feels that a relationship is filled with tension, urgency, or silent competition, the emotional environment becomes unstable. The mind begins associating the relationship with stress. But when someone experiences a relationship that feels calm, supportive, and emotionally safe, something remarkable happens. The subconscious mind begins recognizing that environment as the new emotional home. And once that happens, attention naturally shifts toward that place of stability, not because anyone forced it, but because the mind instinctively moves toward peace. Murphy explained that the subconscious mind always gravitates toward what feels emotionally harmonious. If a relationship feels secure and balanced, the mind relaxes into it. But if a relationship feels like a constant struggle for reassurance, the mind becomes restless. This is why two people can experience the same situation very differently. One person may respond to emotional uncertainty with fear and urgency. Another person may respond with calm confidence and emotional stability. And surprisingly, the second response is usually far more powerful. Because emotional stability creates an atmosphere where clarity can emerge naturally. There is no pressure to make immediate decisions. There is no constant reminder of past relationships. There is simply space for the present connection to grow. And when the present relationship becomes the most emotionally comfortable place in someone's life, the subconscious mind begins reorganizing itself around that reality. Past attachments begin losing their emotional charge. Memories remain, but they no longer carry the same emotional pull. The mind gradually shifts its focus toward what feels most alive and meaningful now. This is why Murphy emphasized that internal states shape external experiences. When your emotional energy carries calm certainty rather than fear, the environment around you begins responding differently. People feel that difference. They respond to it. They relax around it. And relationships often begin shifting in ways that feel almost natural. But this principle leads to one crucial realization. Something that changes the entire way we look at situations where someone still seems connected to another woman. Because once you understand how emotional patterns actually work in the mind, you begin seeing the situation through a completely different lens. And that realization leads directly to the most important truth behind this entire topic. Now we arrive at the realization that changes the entire way you see this situation. The truth is this: he truly loves you, but he may still be emotionally connected to another woman. And as confusing as that sounds, both things can exist at the same time. Because the human heart does not always move in perfectly clean lines. It doesn't close one door completely before opening another. Sometimes emotional connections overlap for a while. Not because someone is dishonest, not because they are trying to hurt anyone, but because emotional bonds created in the past do not disappear instantly. Memories remain. Emotional habits remain. Certain feelings may still echo quietly in the background of the mind, and the subconscious mind, which Joseph Murphy spoke about so often, releases these patterns gradually, not suddenly. This is where many people misunderstand what they are experiencing. They assume that if another emotional connection still exists, then the love they are receiving must not be real. But that assumption is not always accurate. Love can be present while the mind is still reorganizing itself. Care can be genuine while old emotional impressions are fading away. The two realities are not always in conflict. They simply exist at different stages of emotional processing. Think of the mind like a landscape. When someone spends years walking the same emotional path with another person, that path becomes deeply familiar. Even when they choose a new direction, traces of the old road may still be visible for a while. But visibility does not mean permanence. What determines which path becomes dominant is not the past. It is where emotional attention begins to settle in the present. And this is where the deeper insight appears. Emotional connections weaken when they stop receiving attention. They fade when they stop being reinforced. Not through confrontation, not through pressure, but through the quiet strengthening of something new. This is why Joseph Murphy emphasized the power of emotional certainty. When someone enters a relationship that feels calm, balanced, and emotionally secure, the subconscious mind begins forming a new pattern, a new sense of familiarity, a new emotional home, and gradually, the mind starts orienting itself toward that new environment, not because it was forced, but because it feels better, it feels safer, it feels more aligned with peace. And when the present relationship becomes emotionally stronger than the past connection, something natural happens. The old attachment loses its intensity. It stops occupying emotional space, not dramatically, not overnight, but quietly, almost without anyone noticing the exact moment when the shift occurs. What once felt important becomes less significant. What once occupied attention begins fading into the background. And what remains is the connection that feels most alive in the present moment. This understanding changes how you interpret the situation entirely. Instead of seeing yourself as someone competing with another woman, you begin seeing the deeper process unfolding. You realize that emotional attachments are not battles to be won. They are patterns of attention, and attention naturally moves toward what feels emotionally fulfilling. Which means the most powerful position you can hold in this situation is not the position of someone trying to replace another person. It is the position of someone who embodies emotional clarity, someone who does not operate from fear, someone who does not constantly measure themselves against someone from the past, someone who understands their own value and brings calm stability into the relationship. Because calm stability is incredibly attractive to the human mind. It creates an emotional environment where people feel safe to move forward, safe to release the past, safe to invest themselves fully in what exists now. And when that environment becomes stronger than any lingering emotional habit, the subconscious mind does something remarkable. It lets go, not because it was forced to choose, but because it naturally gravitates toward what feels most real, most peaceful, and most meaningful in the present. And once you understand that truth, the situation no longer feels like a competition. It begins to look like something very different. A process, a transition, a moment in which emotional patterns are slowly reorganizing themselves. And when you approach that moment with calm certainty rather than fear, you give the relationship the greatest chance to move toward clarity. Because love does not grow stronger through pressure. It grows stronger through emotional stability. And stability is something no past connection can compete with when it is truly present. Understanding a principle is one thing. Seeing how it plays out in real life is something very different. Because when people hear ideas about emotional certainty and subconscious influence, they sometimes wonder if those ideas actually translate into real relationships. But situations like this happen more often than most people realize. And when people shift their internal approach, the outcomes often change in surprising ways. There was a woman who once shared her story after being in a situation that looked almost exactly like the one we've been discussing. She had been seeing a man for several months. Their connection felt natural from the beginning. They laughed easily, spoke openly, and supported each other through everyday life. He showed genuine care. But there was one detail that continued to disturb her peace. His former partner still seemed present in small ways. Sometimes her name appeared casually in conversation. Sometimes she would notice messages from the past popping up on his phone. There was no clear sign that the relationship was still romantic. But emotionally, it felt unfinished. At first, the woman reacted the way most people do. She began asking careful questions. She watched his reactions. She tried to understand whether she was truly the person he wanted to be with. And the more she looked for answers, the more anxious she became. Every small detail seemed meaningful. Every mention of the past triggered another wave of uncertainty. Eventually, she realized something important. Her entire focus had shifted toward the other woman. Even when she was spending time with him, part of her mind was still measuring the invisible presence of someone else. So she made a quiet decision. She stopped treating the past like a rival. Instead of asking more questions or searching for reassurance, she focused on the quality of the relationship they were building in the present. She became more relaxed, more emotionally steady, more confident in herself, and something unexpected began happening. Without pressure or confrontation, the man slowly started opening up about his past relationship. He explained that the connection had ended long before they met. What remained was mostly familiarity and unfinished emotional habits. But as the new relationship deepened, those habits naturally faded. Not because he was forced to erase the past, but because his emotional attention had fully shifted to the present. Another story illustrates this principle even more clearly. A man once admitted that he had difficulty letting go of emotional connections from his past. He remained friendly with several women he had dated years earlier. There was nothing romantic happening anymore, but the emotional familiarity still existed. When he started dating someone new, she initially felt threatened by those connections. She wondered if she would always be just one of many emotional options. But instead of trying to control the situation, she chose a different approach. She focused on creating a relationship that felt calm and supportive. She never tried to compete with anyone from his past. She simply showed up as someone emotionally secure, and gradually the dynamic shifted. The man found himself investing more time and emotional energy into the new relationship. Not because anyone demanded it, but because the relationship had become the most emotionally fulfilling part of his life. The old connections slowly faded into the background. They stopped carrying the same emotional weight. They became memories rather than active emotional bonds. What both of these stories reveal is something simple but powerful. When emotional certainty replaces emotional competition, relationships often begin reorganizing themselves naturally, because the human mind gravitates toward emotional environments that feel stable. When someone experiences a relationship where they feel understood, accepted, and free from pressure, that connection begins to feel like home. And when something feels like home, the mind naturally releases attachments that no longer serve its present emotional reality. This doesn't happen through force. It happens through emotional alignment, through the quiet power of stability. And once that stability becomes the dominant emotional atmosphere of a relationship, the past gradually loses its hold. Understanding the emotional dynamics behind this situation is powerful. But understanding alone is not enough. What truly changes your experience is how you begin applying that understanding in everyday moments. Because situations like this rarely resolve through one big conversation or one dramatic decision. They shift through small changes in how you think, how you respond, and how you carry yourself inside the relationship. So the real question becomes this: how do you remain emotionally steady when part of you still feels uncertain? The first step is learning to redirect your focus. When the mind senses emotional competition, it naturally becomes obsessed with the other person involved. You start wondering about her. You imagine their history. You analyze every small detail that might confirm her presence in his emotional world. But every minute spent mentally focusing on that other person strengthens the emotional triangle in your own mind. So the first practical shift is simple but powerful. Stop giving emotional attention to the comparison. This doesn't mean pretending the situation doesn't exist. It means refusing to let your mind build an entire emotional narrative around someone who is not part of your present relationship. Every time the mind drifts toward comparison, gently bring it back to the reality that exists now. The connection between you and him, the experiences you share today, the relationship you are building in the present. The second step is emotional composure. This does not mean suppressing your feelings. It means learning to respond instead of react. When fear appears, the instinct is to ask immediate questions or demand reassurance. But urgency often creates pressure, And pressure rarely leads to clarity. Instead, allow space for conversations to happen naturally. Speak honestly when the moment feels calm and open, not when emotions are at their peak. When communication happens in a relaxed emotional atmosphere, people are far more likely to respond with honesty. The third step is something many people overlook entirely. Strengthen your sense of self outside the relationship. When your entire emotional world revolves around whether someone chooses you, every small signal becomes overwhelming. But when your life remains full, with your own goals, friendships, passions, and personal growth, the relationship becomes part of your happiness, not the source of all of it. And that shift creates emotional balance. Balance makes you calmer. It makes you more attractive emotionally. And it prevents the relationship from feeling like a fragile situation that must be constantly monitored. The fourth step is presence. One of the most powerful ways emotional bonds deepen is through shared positive experiences in the present moment. When two people laugh together, support each other, and enjoy life side by side, the subconscious mind begins forming new emotional associations. The relationship starts feeling familiar, comfortable, natural, and as those experiences accumulate, the emotional significance of past connections gradually fades. Not because anyone forces it to happen, but because the present relationship becomes the most emotionally meaningful place in someone's life. The final step is quiet confidence. Confidence does not mean pretending everything is perfect. It means trusting your own worth regardless of circumstances. When you carry yourself with that internal certainty, your energy changes. Your conversations feel calmer. Your presence feels grounded. And relationships tend to respond positively to that emotional stability, because human beings instinctively move toward environments that feel peaceful and secure. And when you become someone who embodies that kind of emotional stability, you create space for relationships to evolve naturally. Not through control, not through competition, but through alignment. And often, that quiet alignment is far more powerful than any attempt to force clarity, because clarity grows best in relationships where people feel free, respected, and emotionally safe. And that environment begins with the energy you bring into the connection every single day. When you truly understand everything we've explored here, something inside you begins to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly. You stop looking at relationships through the lens of competition. You stop feeling like love is something you must constantly defend or secure. And most importantly, you stop measuring your value against someone from another person's past. Because once you understand how emotional patterns actually work inside the human mind, the situation looks completely different. You begin to see that emotional connections are not battles, they are experiences that evolve over time. Some connections remain for a while because they were meaningful in the past, but the human heart always moves toward the place where it feels most alive in the present. And when you understand that, your energy changes. Instead of reacting from fear, you begin operating from calm awareness. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself. You no longer feel the need to compete with memories. You simply show up as someone who knows their worth. Someone who brings emotional stability into the relationship. Someone who is not trying to force clarity, but who naturally creates the conditions where clarity can emerge. This is a powerful identity shift, because many people enter relationships believing that love must be constantly protected from potential rivals. They believe they must become better, more attractive, more understanding than anyone who came before them. But real emotional confidence does not come from comparison. It comes from self-respect. When you respect yourself deeply, your behavior reflects that. You communicate calmly. You maintain healthy boundaries. You allow relationships to grow naturally instead of forcing them into immediate certainty. And that quiet confidence changes how people respond to you. Because emotional stability is something people feel. It creates a sense of safety. It removes the pressure that often complicates relationships. And when someone experiences that kind of emotional atmosphere, something remarkable happens. They relax. They open up. They begin recognizing the relationship not as a place of tension, but as a place of peace. And peace is incredibly powerful. It is one of the strongest emotional magnets that exists. People naturally gravitate toward the places where they feel calm and understood, which means that when you embody that emotional stability, you are no longer trying to compete with the past. You are offering something entirely different, a relationship that feels grounded, a connection that feels safe, an emotional environment where someone can fully step into the present moment without feeling pulled backward. This does not guarantee that every relationship will last forever, but it does guarantee something much more important. You will never lose yourself trying to secure someone's love. You will never abandon your own peace in an attempt to win a silent competition. Instead, you will stand firmly in your own emotional clarity, and when you stand in that place, something powerful happens. You begin attracting relationships that meet you at the same level of emotional maturity. Relationships where both people choose each other freely, not because of pressure, not because of fear, but because the connection genuinely feels right. And that is the kind of love that grows naturally, the kind of love that deepens over time, the kind of love that doesn't require constant reassurance, because it exists in an atmosphere of trust, stability, and quiet confidence. So if you find yourself in a situation where someone you care about still seems connected to another woman, remember this. Your role is not to compete with the past. Your role is to stand fully in who you are, to bring emotional clarity into the present, to embody the kind of stability that relationships naturally grow around. Because you are not here to beg life to choose you. You are not here to prove your worth. You are here to live, love, and connect from a place of quiet strength. And when you do that, the right people will always recognize your value, not because you demanded it, but because your presence makes it impossible to ignore. And that is the true power of understanding the deeper dynamics of love.